The first and last time I played with a Ouija board. Submitted by I Am Peaches. It was a week ago on Monday during school when my friend, we'll call her Laura, had come to me saying that she had gone out and bought a Ouija board. We had a good laugh about how she had gone to a Toys R Us to get it. We went our separate ways that morning, and I somewhat forgot about it in the excitement of the rest of the school day. Let me provide you with some background information. My name is Marissa, but everyone calls me Riss or Mish. I've had some serious ghost encounters in my life, some of which include hearing footsteps up the wooden steps from the basement, or having the light in our fridge go out no matter how many times we replace it. Small things like that. I mean, I've certainly never had a ghost yell boo in my face, so don't blame me for not taking it too seriously at first. I keep saying we because I live with my mom, dad, and my brother. Not a single one of my family members believes that ghosts exist. My family has been baptized Christian to as far back as my great-great-great-uncle, so I guess I can't make them believe otherwise, but after what I saw that night, I will never doubt again. That week flew by, and I didn't spare a second thought for the board until Friday. You see, we were approaching a 3-day weekend. Laura came up to me and asked if I would be interested in playing the board with her on Sunday into Monday. I phoned my mom, and she said it was okay. I went through Saturday and the beginning of Sunday until 3 o'clock on Sunday when my parents dropped me off with Laura and her mom. This is where the story begins in full. Not much happened for the first hour or so besides us going over our plan and eating a whole large pizza. We would stay up and play at 3 a.m. By the way, this is a bad idea and I don't recommend it. We also collected 6 candles from around her house. Apparently we had a death wish. At about 5 p.m., Laura walks in with a baby doll in her hands. She tells me that it looks really creepy, so I thought it could set the mood, though for some reason I can't find the doll's hat. She laughed a bit about that and set the doll down. We decided to watch some movies to pass the time. We settled on Men in Black and begin to watch. About halfway through, I noticed she's texting someone. Being the nosy person I am, I looked over her shoulder to see who it was. It turned out to be our mutual friend and my boyfriend. She asked him what he thought of the Ouija board. We'll call my boyfriend Carter. To be honest, Carter freaked out saying we shouldn't play it and it was demonic and dangerous. We told him we weren't going to do anything stupid with it, and even though he didn't like it, he just told us to be careful and didn't stop us. After watching another movie in a season of an anime, it was about 2:30 a.m. Time to set up. We had pulled a small table into the middle of the room and had the 6 candles positioned around the board. The lights were off and the candles were lit. It hit me then that we might talk to something I didn't want to, but it was too late. We had already begun. At first, nothing happened. We sat for a while, asking dumb questions, and nothing answered. Even though nothing was happening, I felt very uneasy. Laura asked a question, something along the lines of, "Is there anybody there?" when all the flames on the candles went extremely still except for a red one in the back left, which began to flicker unnaturally. Laura and I looked at each other. Was this supposed to happen? We continued asking questions, but now focused on the candle instead of the board. Laura said to the candle, "When the flame holds still, it means no. But if it flickers, then it means yes." The flame began to flicker quickly, like it understood. Laura asked a few questions, easy yes or no questions, and the candle always gave the correct answer. This was legit. I finally drew up all of my courage to ask a single question. Is there something stopping you from talking through the board? I'm not sure why that's where my mind went immediately, but the candle answered yes, so I guess I was onto something. Laura was intrigued, trying to get as much information about it as possible. None of the questions really stood out to me until I heard my friend say, "Is it a demon stopping you?" I remember closing my eyes and saying a short prayer, hoping that it would say no. Though when Laura nudged me, I knew it had said yes. I quickly whispered, "We should say goodbye." Laura nodded in agreement. We said goodbye and looked at the clock. I would have assumed we played for about 30 minutes, maybe less, but when we looked at the clock, it read 5:02 a.m. I felt my heart drop. How? We decided to sleep, or at least try. I slept for a solid 2 hours before I woke up and woke Laura up too because I didn't want to be alone. After eating breakfast and getting ready for the day, it was about an hour before my mom was going to pick me up. We decided to clean up the mess we had made in poor Laura's room. While cleaning, we came across the doll sitting upright against the wall, right where we had left her the night before. Laura picked up the baby doll to put it away, but stopped and held still for a moment looking at me. Then the doll with a shocked expression. I immediately asked her what was wrong. She gestured to the doll without speaking. I inspected the doll and it hit me. The doll was wearing its hat. The same hat Laura said had been missing. She immediately put the doll away and we finished cleaning in silence. We were both really spooked. My mom eventually came to pick me up, and I said goodbye to Laura and her mom and thanked them for having me. I made it home that night to have an awful nightmare. So here I am, writing this story. My story. I haven't gotten a full night's sleep since that night. I can only hope that whatever we talk to won't follow me forever. The most disgusting things you learn about a patient aren't found on a CT scan. Submitted by the Generog. Being a nurse, you tend to see more than your fair share of sick things. What might come to mind for you is probably bodily functions. Don't get me wrong, those can definitely make you a bit squeamish, but believe me, you can get used to that. But the body isn't the only part of a person that can become diseased. The ravings, screaming fits, and the general insanity, I don't know if you can ever completely get used to. The sad thing is, half the time the insanity comes just as much, if not more, from the patient's family as from the patient themselves. But I won't lie, it's a remarkably satisfying feeling to be able to help someone in their time of need. It comes with an emotional cost at times, sure, but it's always worth it. Although sometimes you help in ways you never expect, much like I did with old Pete McDonald. From what I know, old man McDonald was a cantankerous son of a bitch in life. But now all that remained was a gnarled, shriveled frame of someone who couldn't do much but lie in bed. Occasionally he would speak a word or two, but most of his time was spent staring up at the ceiling. It was just past 5 on my usual shift when I changed out the sodium thiopental solution in his IV and took care of the other usual tasks. He was last stop on my round for my shift. I looked at Pete's vitals. Heart rate and breathing both normal. I checked his blood pressure. It was in the usual range, 160 to 90. A little on the higher side, but it was normal for him. I was just finishing up when he started talking. "It's been so long," he began, hesitantly. His voice had the weary tone of someone wanting to get something off their chest. "Yeah, it has, Pete." It was quite common for people under medical care to talk at length to the staff. Believe me, sometimes a patient would tell a caregiver more personal information than their own family. I never thought I would want to talk about this. A man spends so much time with a secret buried. He never wants to talk about it. But since what's about to be buried next is me, what's the harm in talking about it? He had a point there. "Go ahead, Pete. I'm right here." I have no idea if he even knew my name, but he wanted to talk, which meant I was here to listen. When I was younger, I was a real scumbag. His voice was completely hollow, lacking even the slightest bit of emotion. It wasn't a confession so much as a fact. "Oh yeah?" This happened all the time with patients, especially the elderly ones. All that time in bed gave them endless opportunities for reflection. Since I don't think Pete had any visitors since he had been admitted, that meant the guy was stuck with his own company. "You have no idea. Back in my day, I was a first-class hellraiser." "Were you now?" I couldn't help but wonder. We always see seniors as they are now, in the twilight of their lives, older, wiser, and wrinkled. We tend to forget that they didn't always look or act like that. They were the same as us once, young and vibrant. Our mistakes were once theirs. Let me put it this way. I probably shouldn't be alive right now. In fact, it's amazing I lived past the age of 50. Drinking, drugs, robbery. I even knocked a few men off in my time. It still haunts me to this day. I stood there, my arms folded across my chest. You'll be stunned how many times patients open up like this to a total stranger. Like I said, sometimes a patient's bodily functions are the least appalling things we learn about. "Really?" He didn't respond to this, but carried on as if I hadn't said a word. It was 1986, a very bad year for me and my family. Since I was infatuated with the bottle, I literally pissed away all of our money. I lashed out at everything and everyone around me. It didn't help that I messed around with the wrong people. It all came to a head on August 7th, 1986. "Go on," I whispered, although I knew perfectly well he would continue whether I wanted him to or not. There was this guy who lived near my house. Went by the name of Snake Eyes Bennett. He was what you call a big shot. All of us around town resented him. It wasn't just that he was rich. It was because Snake Eyes was shady and rich. Why do you think we called him Snake Eyes? It was an open secret that the guy had gotten his privileged status by rather unorthodox means. "There's one in every town," I nodded in agreement. He was a hustler. But Snake Eyes didn't have the balls to be a legit hustler. None of the hardcore stuff, no. He was a swindler. A suit and tie wearing kind, a real snake oil salesman. That's a good one. A harsh laugh quickly filled the room for a moment before turning into a racking cough that made his entire body convulse. but he had more to say after he caught his breath. Hell, the rest of us would have had some respect if he actually went out there and got his hands dirty. But no, it wasn't for him. He was one of those Chamber of Commerce types who smiles at you when he's robbing you blind. So you can imagine, that didn't sit well with the rest of us. Not one bit. He took a moment to clear his throat before carrying on. You gotta think, Oak Point was going through a pretty rough time back then. Unemployment was through the roof. Most of us did an honest day's work for no money. Some of us had our vices, most of us in fact. But we made sure to toe the line as much as we could. Seeing Snake Eyes flaunt his wealth around town was just the straw that broke the camel's back. So what'd you do? I had sat down in a visitor chair so I could face him as he spoke. One night a bunch of us were out in the town. When you're in a group, things sort of take on a life of their own, especially when you're all hammered out of your mind. I don't remember who suggested it, but one of us knew Snake Eyes was held up at some rat-hole hotel about 15 miles away. His family was out of town for some reason. He was concluding one of his business transactions, as he called it. Naturally, he thought it was a great idea to go pay him a visit. He had ripped off everyone in the town, and it was high time to take back what was ours. It was only right. I shuffled my feet and leaned back in the chair as Pete rambled on. It seemed like we were there in no time at all, crowded in the front of that door. Room number 12. The 2 was crooked, and the gray paint was peeling. When Snake Eyes answered the door, all of us rushed him. He went to pieces quicker than a wet newspaper. Hell, I can see it now. I mean, I knew he was a coward, but if you're going to rip people off, you better toughen up, son. Right. I nodded in agreement. I wasn't surprised at what he was telling me. Part of me was hoping that what Pete had to say next would never come out of his mouth, but the rest of me just wanted him to spit it out. In no time at all, we had Snake Eyes all tied up. We made out good when we went through his stuff. $700 in cash, a gold watch, and some jewelry. Wasn't bad for a night's work. There were 5 of us all together, Luke, Brendan, Travis, James, and yours truly, all seeking our own version of justice for how Snake Eyes ripped us off. Take Luke, for example. He lost his farm, had been in the family for generations because the bank jacked up his mortgage rate. Guess who sat on the board? Snake Eyes. That's right, my boy. The same goes for the rest of us. Well, since Snake Eyes stabbed us all in the back, we decided to do the same to him. But don't worry, we didn't neglect the front either. There it was. I knew it was coming. But knowing something is coming and experiencing it in the moment are 2 completely different things. It was the way he said it that was so profound, so matter-of-factly. Like Pete was talking about a routine trip to the mall or something. So what happened next? I felt myself sit up straighter in the chair. Got rid of the body. Threw it in some old freezer with a padlock, tossed it in the back seat of what had been Snake Eyes' Cadillac, and drove it down to the swamp, just off the old highway. We just cruised that thing right into the water. I can still hear the sound of it sinking. As we walked away, Luke said something. Boys, I'm amazed we just did that. I was expecting the swamp to spit Snake Eyes right back out. And we all had a good chuckle over that. I bet. Did anyone ever find out? No. It didn't hurt that no one in the town was exactly sad to see him go. I gotta admit, though, for years I was terrified his family or someone would come for revenge, but they never did. I guess they hated him as much as the rest of us. He looked out the window for a second as he seemed temporarily absorbed in thought. But he turned back to face me after a moment, although one by one we all lost touch. It wasn't long after that when I went to the Slammer for a few years. Armed robbery, amongst others. I was in and out for a few years, my wife and kid long gone. Haven't seen any of them in years. Apart from me, all of us who were there that night have all passed on. I'm sorry to hear that. I wasn't sorry for a moment, but what else do you say to something like that? Kind of you, son. So anyways, that's my little story. Hope you enjoyed it. He spoke like he was reminiscing about a pleasant afternoon fishing or something else. It was pretty fucked up. It wasn't dull, that's for sure. Anything else you need, Pete? I asked as I stood up from my seat. He shook his head. My time to head out. I'll see you later. I walked out of his room as he continued to ramble on incoherently. I had never been so happy to leave there. The front doors to the hospital glided open smoothly and I walked out into the cool evening air. I felt like I was in some sort of trance as I unlocked my car, put the key in the ignition, and drove home. My body felt numb, like it was on autopilot. Somehow, once I got on the highway, my mind suddenly switched back on. A million emotions flooded through my body at once. I spent the rest of the drive in silence, processing what had just happened. I got back home about 20 minutes later. As I saw my front door, I relaxed a bit. Walking into my condo, I switched the lights on. The dark blue walls and crisp white carpet never failed to make me feel at home. My mom was asleep on the couch, the TV blaring in the background. She's been in town for the week and has been staying with me. When I switched on the lights, she bolted awake. "What time is it?" she slurred out as she rubbed her eyes. "I just got home from work, Mom," I told her as I got a bottle of water out of the refrigerator. She instantly sat up straighter. "How was your day?" she asked. My mom was always curious to hear stories about my job. "Well, the patient told me a little secret of his. I guess he killed some rich big shot decades ago out of spite. He finally spilled the beans after all these years. As soon as I'm done with my drink, I'll call the missing person hotline. That reward money isn't going to collect itself, you know." "Did it shock you?" Mom looked at me, her expression full of concern. I wish I could say it did, but nope, not one bit. She nodded solemnly. "But then he mentioned how he was always afraid of Snake Eyes' family coming after him," I added. "Oh yeah?" She looked faintly amused. "Yep, they mentioned his own family as an afterthought. But nothing new there. Thank God his wife took their kids and ran." "Indeed," Mom agreed. "Best decision I ever made. I cringed to imagine what would have happened if I didn't. You know, the man I don't dare to call your father was always more interested in Snake Eyes' family than in us." My friend who died on a camping trip 4 years ago just arrived at my dorm. Submitted by Spooky Space Spirit. He looked exactly as he did then, but a bit taller. A soft face with small eyes and thin lips that always made him look younger than he actually was. Just a little bit of 5 o'clock shadow that made him more grown up. Grinning, he dropped his duffel bag and opened his arms wide. "Richie, how are you, man?" Darren, his gritty voice so familiar, asked. I must have looked stoned because I just could not believe what I was seeing. I squeaked out a hello and I was quickly pulled into a hug. It's weird to think, but he even smelled the same as he did back then. Weed and pepperoni pizza. Darren being Darren, he rambled along about how long it's been and how much I've changed, and I couldn't help but think, you died 4 years ago. Myself, Darren, and 2 friends would always go into a nearby forest for camping trips between the ages of 12 and 15. They were just chances to get away from our parents, smoke weed, and eat a bunch of shit without adults telling us off. None of us had much money, so our camping equipment was 2 kiddie tents, stolen from siblings or neighbors' yards, and a box of matches that we would use to make our own fire pit. We weren't totally stupid. We knew not to stray from the path, and we never went much more than a mile into the forest. There was a 1-mile marker, and before that, whichever way you wandered, you came out to a main road. Past that marker, it was thick, unforgiving woodlands that was almost impossible to find your way out of. Further than that was a disgusting swampland that stunk like rotten farts. Guess what we'd do? We'd be cocky assholes and dare each other to walk into the woods. 5 minutes, then 10, then 30. The triumphant would come swaggering out. Oh, that wasn't scary. Only idiots could get lost in there. You can probably guess. We were idiots. Due to a particular week of warm weather in mid-November, we decided it would be fun to go camping. Covered in winter coats and snow boots and thick thermo socks, we got to the 1-mile marker, and before setting up, one friend, Jimmy, said, "Let's go deeper. I heard rangers were going around rounding people up. I ain't going home because of some bitch forest security guard." Agreeing, we went past that 1-mile marker. I can't be sure, but I'd say we were 3 miles deep past the marker. The woodlands were incredibly crowded. We had to climb over a lot of huge ground-broken roots to finally find a flat clearing for our tents. It really wasn't so scary, just darker than other areas. We set up, lit some blunts, and chowed down on a bunch of chips and 2-day-old pizza. Nothing happened until late in the night. The tents were small, but we could fit 2 people in each. Jimmy and Marcus went in one, Darren and I in the other. We soon fell asleep, probably about 11 p.m. My phone buzzed at about 1 a.m., which woke me up as it was under my face, with a message from my dad, drunk, texting me to see if I was all right. Delirious from sleep, I just touched it to turn the harsh screen light off. Just before the light went off, though, I noticed a silhouette on the tent. It went off too fast to see what it was properly, and with my brain still in night mode, I touched the phone to get the light again. The silhouette didn't shift, but I saw it properly then. It crouched down. I guess it noticed the light coming through the tent, and I saw how long its legs were, like 5-foot-long sticks. Its arms were similar, swinging as it crouched. It pressed its long fingers into the tent, and it made that horrid scraping noise. kept as quiet as I could. If it was a ranger, they would have started banging on the tent and announcing themselves. I turned the light off again and turned to face Darren. Outside the tent came the sound of leaves and sticks crushing underfoot. The person was sneaking around. The sound was so careful and quiet. They didn't want to be heard. I began to get those shakes you get when you're really cold or really anxious. I tried to whisper to Darren to wake him up. Pretty sure he had a pocket knife on his body somewhere. I thought it would come in handy with this freak checking out our tents. I whispered through my teeth, "Darren, wake up!" But the guy was a heavy sleeper. I almost pissed myself when I heard the zipper of the tent begin to pull. The person was trying to open it, carefully though. They were trying hard to stay quiet. They were gently tugging the zipper, but they couldn't figure out which way it went. It went top to bottom to open. Finally, the zip comes down, and I kept my eyes closed tight, but I was shaking like a leaf. I opened my eyes a slit to see what was there. A hand, black and thin, crept in. Extremely slowly, this hand did not twitch, but hovered further into the tent, over the feet of Darren's sleeping bag. Before I could nudge Darren to wake him up, the hand clenched a hold of Darren's ankles and pulled him from the tent. Darren instantly began screaming, and so did I. I tried to grab a hold of Darren before he disappeared through the tent's opening. He was pulled out so fast. The tent rolled over, but I finally managed to get out and see Darren getting dragged into the woodlands beside the clearing. He was covering his face from the twigs and the shrubs he was pulled into, screaming and crying to help him. Jimmy and Marcus's face appeared from their tent with worried looks. I yelled at them that something had taken Darren, and they looked at one another with hesitant faces. They thought it was a joke. I grabbed my boots, forgot my coat, and ran in the direction Darren was dragged. Jumping over small tree trunks and loose branches, I got hit in the face with a branch. Panicked as liquid sprayed on me from the leaves of the branch. It stunk of copper, but I just rubbed my face and continued in a straight line. I could hear Jimmy and Marcus following me, asking me to stop and that this wasn't funny. I sprinted as fast as I could, taking a beating from the branches and roots that got thicker and thicker the further I went in. I was shouting Darren's name, and soon Jimmy and Marcus did the same, but we didn't get any reply. 5 minutes of running through thick nature brought me to another clearing, bigger than where our tents were, with a large tree in the center. There was a little bit of moonlight to see the clearing, but nothing else was clear. Jimmy luckily grabbed his flashlight before he began to follow me. When he put the light on me, he and Marcus jumped, as the light showed the blood all over my face. My face, my clothes, everything was covered in splatters. That's what was on the branches. I began to cry as I tried to rub the blood off me. Jimmy took the light off me and with a worried look followed something on the ground. "What is it?" Marcus asked. Jimmy pointing to the ground. A trail of blood ran from the woodlands through the clearing and up the large tree in the center. We all followed the light as Jimmy moved it along the trail. It covered most of the bark and curled around the trunk. We peeked around the tree and the blood stopped at the trunk. Marcus looked further around the trunk when a droplet of blood fell onto his forehead, and then another, and another. He looked up and began to scream. Darren's body, his eyes still open but blank, was slung over a thick branch. I told Jimmy to keep the light on us as I tried to get him down. I pulled his arms and his body came down, like a sack of bricks. I think we all knew he was dead there and then, but we just didn't want it to be true. Darren landed on his belly, and we saw that his back had been ripped to shreds. There was no flesh there. His shirt had been ripped off clean. All his muscles and organs were all mushed around. His spine was severed too. We all just cried. There wasn't much else we could do. After a long time sitting next to his body, the sun was beginning to rise. We didn't say much, but we agreed we'd have to get him back to our tents and call someone. Our parents, the Rangers, Darren's parents. I pet Darren's hair before I stood up. He was my best friend, and I had to leave him there. If I had just shook him awake when that thing was out there next to the tent, he probably would still be alive. As we began to leave the clearing, a squelching sound came from behind us. We all spun around and saw that thing, holding Darren's body. It was tall, maybe 7 foot, and thin, and all black. Its eyes were wide and sunken. Can't remember much else as it quickly ran to the woodlands with Darren's body. Jimmy and Marcus had to restrain me from running after it. They basically dragged me, kicking and screaming, back to the tents. When we got there, 2 Rangers were checking the tents out, and their faces switched from annoyed to shocked when they saw us covered in blood and crying. Darren's body was never found. His parents were distraught. He had a younger brother, and that kid was never the same. Went from fun and bouncy to just there. He just drifted day to day, 2 years after his death, Darren's family moved down south and we never heard from them again. The rangers and police believed we didn't do anything, but they didn't believe our monster story either. Most likely a wolf. Shock can make you think crazy things. It's not their fault, one of the officers said behind our backs. Jimmy, Marcus, and I stayed friends, but basically ended contact when we finished high school. We never spoke about Darren again. But now, in the flesh, Darren was chatting away to me in the doorway of my dorm. I asked him into my room. My roommate hadn't arrived yet, so I thought we could get some privacy to talk. The way he spoke and acted, he was so comfortable around me. Like the last time I saw him was yesterday. He sat down on the bed opposite mine and continued talking. I don't know what he was talking about, but I stopped him and took some time to come up with what I wanted to ask him. "Darren, how are you here?" I asked. "What do you mean?" He laughed. "Did good in high school, dumbass, just like you." I shook my head. "No, Darren, do you remember 4 years ago?" Darren was smiling, but his eyes went blank. "Yes, we were in freshman year." "Do you remember our camping trips?" I said. His smile faded as he looked around the room as if trying to find an answer. "Yeah, we'd smoke and eat junk." "Darren," I trailed off. What was I supposed to say? "Oh, dude, you died. Don't you remember? Man, what fun times. On one of those trips you were attacked and your body was never found." Darren gave me a totally blank look and grinned. The grin was a genuinely happy smile. In a flash, the grin dropped and he looked sullen. "I moved away that summer. I never went on camping trips." He wouldn't look at me now. We sat in silence for some time before he stood up and grabbed his bag. He was breathing really quickly. His chest was going up and down fast. "Dude, are you all right?" "I have to go," Darren muttered, looking at his feet. I stood, but he quickly shuffled to the door and left. The door swung shut behind him, and by the time I opened it and looked up and down the dorm's halls, he was nowhere to be seen. People were still moving in and out of the dorms. "Hey, didn't you see that guy that just left?" I asked the small crowd. A few stopped and shook their heads at me. I feel like I've gone crazy. I have no explanation as to what just happened.